years ago, I was invited to a very fancy dinner party, and I didn't know anyone at the table. But to my left, there he was, Brad Pitt. Yeah. And, I was not trying to get a selfie from him like everyone else. I was cool, so I kind of ignored him until the dessert course came around, and he turned to me, and he said, "Hi, I'm Brad." I said, "Oh, no introduction needed." And he asked me, who I was and what I was doing, but that's when I really panicked. Because actually, I was in the middle of a creative sabbatical, which is a very fancy way of saying unemployed. But I couldn't tell Brad Pitt I was unemployed, so I made up something on the spot and said, I study cities and how cities have been designed by men for men. And I wish I could tell you the rest of the story, but I can't, because it was just a dream. I know. But it was a real dream that I had in the middle of my very real creative sabbatical. And I'm so glad that I did, because thanks to Brad, I woke up to a new reality. You see, I actually do have 2 degrees in urban planning from MIT. And I've lived in cities all in the East and West, from Seoul to Boston to Washington, D.C., Rome, and now the grand city of Treviso. And it wasn't until that dream that I truly considered that maybe spaces are designed by default for men. And so just as Brad Pitt helped me have this epiphany, I want to open up your eyes to the invisible fences that are inside our cities that exclude other genders, other sexual orientation, other age groups from really feeling like they belong. And more than just pointing out the problems, I want you to leave inspired by the innovations that are coming from government, but also everyday individuals that are tackling to make our cities more safe, more accessible, and more inclusive. But if I'm really good, I'll have convinced you that you have the agency, that you have the power to change the spaces yourselves. But first, you must be wondering, how can a city discriminate? Well, like many of you, I've traveled a lot and to 35 different countries. And no matter where I went, where the language was different or the culture was different, why was it that there's always a symbol of a man at a crosswalk? And when we go into public plazas, how often do we see statues of women, or are they all men? And ladies, you know what I'm talking about. When we go to the public bathroom, the line is always longer for us than it is for men, right? Lots of nodding heads. And also, why in Italy is it that the diaper changing table is in the women's bathroom, but not yet in the men's bathroom? And the problem is not just against women. Cities and spaces also discriminate against anyone who's not a typical, able-bodied, employed male. What does it say about our cities when we allow cool electric scooters into our streets and sidewalks, but then we forget about the impact it has on anyone in a wheelchair? And let's talk about the pandemic. The pandemic of social isolation amongst our senior citizens who are feeling extremely lonely, exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. Why don't we build spaces where people of all generations could mingle and build relationships rather than marginalizing our senior citizens to the edges? Now, these may sound like small examples, trivial inconveniences, but it's more than that. Because when we design spaces for just one type of user, we exclude everyone else. And that's why we have to build inclusivity. And I want to share with you 2 examples that do just that. One that's top-down from the government, and another bottom-up from a coalition of activists. Let's travel to Vienna, Vienna, Austria, that's known to be a very female city, a female-friendly city. And why is that? Since the 1990s, they've had a gender planning department led by this woman, Eva Kale. And what Eva Kale and her department did was systematically take down barriers against women in the city. Now, they started pretty simply by just renaming streets and plazas after women. But then they got into tackling the hardware, retrofitting staircases like this to help both moms and dads who have strollers to go and access the staircases. They even took surveys and found where hotspots were, where women felt unsafe, anxious, and installed bright public street lighting. They re-engineered the street pattern, the traffic patterns, to prioritize pedestrians instead of cars. Now, these interventions began to help women and were supposed to only help women, but because of the nature of inclusivity, it actually ended up benefiting everyone. And that includes those with strollers, caretakers, the elderly, and even children. But solutions don't have to come just from the government. They can come from its people. And that's what community activist Paula Siegel proved in New York City when she identified 596 acres of abandoned lots. It turns out these lots that were fenced up, overgrown weeds, completely unused, belonged to the government, which meant it belonged to its people. And what she did was put up signs like this and said, let's demand to take those fences down. Let's demand to use those unused lots and for our public use. And that's exactly what happened. And with the communities coming together, they were able to create vibrant public spaces like this urban farm you see today. So, what is the future of our cities and our spaces? Certainly, we have to start from a core of inclusivity. But how? There's been a lot of hype that the future of cities equals smart cities, as if this new technology of artificial intelligence, big data, and the Internet of Things will magically solve all our problems. But what if technology is just a layer, and it's like a blanket that would just cover the broken areas, but not actually fundamentally change what we need to change? And I'd argue that maybe for the future of our spaces, it's not really the physical spaces that will be relevant, but actually virtual spaces. Now, many of you might still not know what the metaverse is, but let me tell you a fact. Your children will spend most of their social life in the metaverse. Scary, I know. But it's already happening right now. Generation Alpha spends more time on virtual games like Roblox, Fortnite, and Minecraft than they do on Netflix, YouTube, and all social media channels combined. And these are not just games to them. They're very real, just like Piazza Mazzini and YeSeul were for you and your friends. And that's why it's critical that we can't make the same mistakes in the metaverse as we did in our physical spaces. In fact, the worst mistake we can do is just let somebody else design the spaces for our children. Are we really going to let a bunch of tech bros in Silicon Valley wearing hoodies design for billions and billions of people how we interact with each other? Or how your children will spend time and money in the metaverse? Are we going to let them control how we experience reality? Rather than this, I think we need to take an active role and use the metaverse as an opportunity to challenge the traditional top-down urban planning approach to creating spaces and try a more democratic and community-led approach. And we could even use the metaverse as an opportunity to reimagine spaces. I mean, as much as I'd like to, we can't go out into our cities and tear them down and build them up from scratch, right? But what if we really did need to reimagine a city around the needs of a single working mother or a minimum wage worker? The beauty of the metaverse is that we don't have to just imagine it with our minds. We can actually create it. We can co-create it, we can live in it, and we can take the best ideas and apply it into our physical spaces. So in conclusion, I've shared with you some of the problems and solutions that we have in our physical spaces. But I've also warned all of you that we have to pay attention just as much to the virtual spaces as we did to our physical. That the metaverse poses an incredible risk, but also an immense opportunity about how we think about the future of our cities and spaces. But the most important takeaway is that we should not accept the status quo. That it's on us, all of us, to actively challenge, transform, mold, and craft the spaces that we live in. So I invite all of you to go back home and start noticing the invisible fences in your cities. The fences that ignore the needs of women. The fences that make it harder for the elderly to go around a city. The fences that make cities unsafe for our children. And together, let's tear those fences down and reimagine cities that aren't just based around economic productivity or the needs of one type of user or capitalism or consumerism. And rather, let's dream bigger. Let's dream bigger and create worlds that prioritize the care economy, public health, serendipity, sustainability, kindness, or simply joy. And that would make for a very interesting dinner conversation should you ever meet Brad Pitt in your dreams, in the metaverse, or in real life. Thank you.